past behavior. This is something that he would take personally, because it is personal, and so it's very different.
Yeah,
from
I think he may.
I'm thinking.
Than the policy disputes that we've seen these two have in the past.
John Heilman.
Carol, I'm curious just in the very short term here, because of all these things that have been happening, and then you have the exchange over the North Korean diplomacy. Like, what's in this moment when Trump goes after Tillerson, cuts his knees out from under him over the weekend? What happens at Foggy Bottom? Does Tillerson then throw up his hands in frustration and say, the president's going to undermine me that way in public, I'm fine, I'll just give up on diplomacy? Or is he really in a conscious way saying, no, this is all part of a game, I'm going to continue on the second track that we're trying to establish here?
I think there's definitely frustrations on both sides. I'm talking to people at the White House over the weekend. He just surprised them. It wasn't, he didn't, and their view is, you know, he's over in China and he's saying things without clearing them with the White House, without giving anyone a heads up, without running them through the traps. And that was what caught people off guard and really upset them. And that is something that I think, above all, like, really has caused a lot of the friction.
Harold Ford.
Carol, you said in some reporting also that at least some reporting suggests that there might even be some clashes with.
Well, I mean, first, before we get to the news, everybody was talking about just all of the missteps that the president
got so many texts yesterday
in Puerto Rico. First of all, throwing paper towels at the victims of the hurricane like it was a game. Never seen anything like that before.
Ever.
And then saying, boy, you're lucky you didn't face a real catastrophe.
You should be proud.
Yeah, when Willie, the stories coming out of Puerto Rico every day really keep getting worse. You know, drinking water, what, maybe over half of the population doesn't have drinking water. People have been stranded up on hillsides for since the storm came through.
No electricity.
No electricity. No electricity. It is a grim, exceedingly grim situation being faced by many residents of that island. And Donald Trump goes in and goes, well, you're lucky you're not facing a real catastrophe.
If you watch that event from start to finish, it was truly bizarre. The tone and the tenor of what was being said and the way it was being said was celebratory. It was like they'd finished a mission and they were there to celebrate it and toast to it. Meanwhile, as you point out, there's devastation right outside the door of where he was sitting. And you can see some of the discomfort on some of the Puerto Rican officials' faces, although they were glad he was there and although they're glad that some of that aid is now getting.
Jared Kushner between Secretary Tillerson, has that complicated things even more for him? Or better yet, when did that happen in your timeline, and has that complicated things even more?
Into Puerto Rico.
They're put in a horrible position.
Just it was go around the room and talk about what a great job we've done. And let's make sure these cameras see that it's.
See, the Kushner's folks will downplay that you know there may have been some friction in the past, but that's not the case now, and it's gotten better. But here's the thing about Tillerson: if the president decides to turn on him, it's hard to see who's going to rally to his side. He has no big supporters in Congress, in the White House, and even in his own State Department. And when you're in that sort of dynamic, it's hard to see who's going to try to come in and save him, except for perhaps the two people who did it in July, which is Kelly and Mattis.
Is that a very articulate way to say he's not a part of the Jedi Council?
I still want to know what that is, but I'm going to defer right now to Julie Pace. Julie, jump in.
Hey, Carol, great story. One thing that I thought was really interesting in there, I hope you can expand on a little bit, is there was a reference to Pence having a conversation with Tillerson about Nikki Haley and asking whether Tillerson thought that she was being helpful in the administration. Can you talk a little bit about that dynamic between Tillerson and Haley and how that may be affecting his frustrations here?
Sure. There is a lot of tension between the offices of Tillerson and Haley because she is seen as sort of the heir apparent.
Much better than is being reported in the media. Give him credit again for going. And going and handing out aid and meeting some of the people, but he left early, and it just felt like a very sort of pro forma visit, like something he had to do.
Well, and again, what he did throughout was inappropriate. It was bizarre behavior. It was celebratory when this is an island that's struggling, and we see once again John Heilman. Once again, another example over the past week, what many people have always said about him, a basic lack of humanity. We saw it with him attacking and whipping up a crowd into a frenzy to boo John McCain last week. We saw it over the weekend when the people of Puerto Rico were struggling, and he was calling them basically ingrates. Yesterday he goes there and he says
Tillerson departs his post. You know, that comment came from my conversation with Tillerson's top spokesperson, R.C. Hammond.
Boy, you're really busting our budget. Really? Really? I mean, would we like to go down the list? I mean, how much his tax cuts are going to end up costing the country? And it will cost the country.
How about just accommodating his family's private jets?
If you just, talk about his family's private jets.
And who, you know, when I called him initially, he said, you know, I don't know what happened in that meeting with Vice President Pence. You know, they talk about policy. And then he called me back and he said, you know, actually there was one meeting where they talked about something other than policy. And that was when the Vice President asked Tillerson if he thought that Haley was helpful or hurtful to the administration's policies, and that was kind of a very, in my view, overt way of taking a shot at Nikki Haley, and it was surprising.
To read this entire NBC News exclusive reporting on Rex Tillerson, go to NBCnews.com. Carol and Andrea Mitchell will have more on the story ahead on the Today Show. Carol, thank you very much. Andrea will also join us later this morning, and NBC News and MSNBC will have more developments on this exclusive reporting throughout the day and tonight on Nightly News.
Carol, thank you so much. We appreciate you joining us. When we come back, we're going to be talking to David Ignatius more about this and sort of the chaos that has been going on at the White House, only for about 8.5 months. Also, Tom Cole's going to be here.
Yes, he is. And his administration's private jets.
It's staggering. The basic lack of humanity, and the growing concern that's always been there that this man is disconnected from reality, at least in communications, the way one human being speaks to another human being, the way a president is supposed to speak to constituents and people in need. He is incapable of even doing the most basic things.
Yeah, and I think it's a particular aspect of humanity. It's this thing, and it's not the first time that anyone said it. We've talked about it, in fact, since he's come on the public stage. But this particular quality of empathy that he lacks. He does things that are cruel sometimes. In the case of John McCain, these are all various issues. But in this case, you know, one of the most fundamental things you need to do as President of the United States in a circumstance like this, when people are suffering, people have been suffering, is not to play comparative games. This is worse than that. Not to talk about yourself. Not to boast about how well you're doing or how, you know, it's not, none of this. It should be about these constituents and about, you know, to use the famous Clinton phrase, about feeling their pain. It's actually not that hard, and well, it's not hard at all. It's not that hard. You could do it. There are some great political talents, great presidents do it. Some of them do it exquisitely well. Some of them do it adequately, but it's not that hard to do it adequately because it's. And we're going to ask Tom Cole whether he's ever been invited to Speaker Ryan's Jedi Council, or whether he's stuck on the ice.
Also, the former governor of Puerto Rico reacts to President Trump's trip to the island and the long road to recovery after Hurricane Maria.
Not them, but the people in the house. Basic function of being a human being who sees someone in pain and is able to understand that and feel for the person who's suffering. And even know, Harold Ford, what is appropriate and what is not appropriate, you wonder where this 71-year-old man has lived his entire life. You wonder, has he so insulated himself from human beings? Has he so insulated himself from suffering that he does? You see this growing body of actions, and you just say this man is disconnected from basic norms of social behavior.
The empathy, the inspiration, the emotion, for him mostly comes from wanting to defend himself. I think you and John said it best, he finds himself in a moment where people are expecting this from him, a human side from him, a humane side from him, and all he really gives us is he wants to defend himself. He was most offended when he arrived in Puerto Rico, the fact that the mayor of San Juan had been critical of his administration's efforts. So as Willie said, he spent the bulk, if not all, of that press conference with it was a weird setup around a table with like 30 or 40 people in that auditorium, praising him and praising the people around him. So it's consistent with whom he is, and I hope one can only pray he gets better.
So believe it or not, there's lots more to show you on this.
These two have in the past.
John Heilman.
Carol, I'm curious just in the very short term here, because of all these things that have been happening, and then you have the exchange over.
I think there's definitely frustrations on both sides. I'm talking to people at the White House over the weekend. He just surprised them. It wasn't. He didn't. And their view is, he's over in China and he's past behavior. This is something that he would take personally, because it is personal, and so it's very different.
Yeah,
from
I think he may.
I'm thinking.
Than the policy disputes that we've seen.
Frustration and say the president's going to undermine me that way in public. I'm fine. I'll just give up on diplomacy, or is he really in a conscious way saying, no, this is all part of a game. I'm going to continue on the second track that we're trying to establish here. The North Korean diplomacy. Like, what's in this moment? When Trump goes after Tillerson, cuts his knees out from under him over the weekend, what happens at Foggy Bottom? Does Tillerson then throw up his hands?